Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video we are going to talk about stateful and stateless architecture. These kind of videos I'm creating to clear out certain concepts which users have asked me on emails or other comments. So today's video, let's discuss about what is a stateful and a stateless architecture. Now, if you go for a web design or for fundamentally a system design, these two terminologies you are going to encounter on a daily basis. So let's talk about firstly a stateless architecture. Now, in a stateless architecture, there is no retention of client or application data. So it means if there is a request and then there is a response, that only what happens. There is no saving of the state or any kind of a data within that request and response. Each request is very much independent, so it means the server or to whom the request is being sent, there's no kind of a identification whether it is coming from the same user or a different user. It's an independent request even if it is coming from the same user, and it's very highly scalable because as the servers doesn't have to maintain any kind of a state, so the stateless architecture is very much highly scalable. You could scale it horizontally or very easily. You don't have to worry about lot many other parameters like saving state or as such, which becomes an issue within the stateful architecture. And typical example is the HTTP and HTTPS. So by default, the HTTP, HTTPS, they are stateless or stateless architecture belonging to that particular kind of a domain. And if we want to visualize this stateless architecture, so if you can see a user is there who sends a request one, let's say, to any server, which is a web server typically, and then the server responds back to that user, and which is a response one for that. Now in this case, the server is not knowing who is the user, where the request is coming from. It is just a request and the server responds back to that. So that's where typically a stateless architecture works. Now the same user, although it is the same user, we are just taking one example, it sends a request to and it gets a response to, but in terms of the web server or the server does not maintain a state or does not know that it is coming from the same user. So that is a stateless architecture. So let's say if I go on to any website, which is any normal website, I access the home page. Second time I also access the home page. Third time also I access the home page. The server is just receiving a request and server is responding back. There is no stateful architecture within that. It is just a stateless architecture. So now as we understand what is a stateless architecture, let's try understanding what is a stateful architecture. Now the stateful architecture, we definitely have retention of the client or application data, which is typically represented by a state. So we can say, oh, this particular client has that kind of a state right now. And it can include a username, a password, a profile image, or whatnot. So state is normally stored, as I mentioned, like user data, profile image, or any other properties for that particular user. And it is difficult to scale. So let's imagine if we are going to have multiple web servers, so in order to kind of horizontally scale that architecture, it is difficult to scale because we would have to keep the information that which user is connected to which server, and the state needs to be stored, what currently the state of the user is. So let's say if the user is going on to AWS or let's say Amazon website, they are buying certain kind of devices or any other kind of they are doing some kind of a shopping. So what they have to do is they have to add those items in the cart before they actually can buy that. Now just imagine if we have multiple servers, we would need to kind of maintain that state. What are the items in the cart, which cart belongs to which user, whether the user has a cart or not, and other details. So it's definitely difficult to scale up. And state is normally stored in a database. Typically there are different ways. We cannot really delve into how the state is stored, but typically it is stored in a database. Now if we want to visualize a stateful architecture, let's say a user one is there Now, user 1 sends a request to a server, which is typically a web server. The state of that user is stored in the database, and it can then typically identify who's the user, whether the user has certain kind of a state or not. That state is stored in the database, and it can typically respond back to that particular user. Now, let's say there is another user, which is user 2, which comes. So this particular user, the web server would be able to identify this user as compared to the user 1, because for both of the users, user 1 and user 2, the state of the users is definitely stored in the database, and the web server is typically able to identify to whom, to which user the details or the request is coming through. So if the user sends a request, user 2 sends a request, the web server would be able to identify the state from the same database because it is storing all the states, and then it could send back a response to that particular user. So that's how a stateful architecture works. Now, I hope, guys, this is one of the very important concepts within system design, where whether you would like to have a stateful or a stateless architecture. The stateless or stateful architecture doesn't really confine only to the web request. Even the firewalls, they have the stateless and stateful architectures being implemented. They're a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but this kind of a concept in a system design does come into HTTP or web design or a security or other systems also. So I hope, guys, this video definitely helps you to understand what is a stateless and a stateful architecture, and you would be able to use it or design it in your daily job. I'll be coming back with more videos, so please stay tuned and have a good one. Thank you.